There's one in every family. That one person who, no matter what everybody else says, just refuses to agree. And if you think there isn't one in your family, I'm sorry to say that's probably because it's you. I've spent the last 15 years studying debate, which means I've learned a lot about what doesn't work when you're trying to get through to disagreeable people. This is a climate TED conference. I'm not a climate expert. But the lessons I've learned about communication can help the folks who understand the real science persuade those who they want to care. When I started debating all those years ago back in high school, I used to think that sounding smart was the same thing as being smart. I went up to crowds and I puffed out my chest and I talked with acronyms and illusions. Why say something straightforward like people should not be arrested for no reason when you can go, I adhere to the principles espoused by Article 9 of the UDHR, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. My judges were teachers and educated parents, and the ones who liked me praised my vocabulary. And those who didn't, I said, look, it's not that I'm a bad debater, it's that you're a bad listener. That mindset caught up with me during the final round of my senior year, where I had to argue about the rights that musicians should have to the music that they create. I thought the smart thing to do was contest if the idea of rights existed in the first place. I was wrong. We lost unanimously. In the time since, I felt defensive, but after I finished my doctorate, I thought there's still so much I had to learn. So I spent a full year taking road trips down to the deep rural South. And I spoke with people who might not share my background or my beliefs. I also joined a debate league called the International Public Debate Association. The point isn't that you're discussing complicated ideas in front of experts. Your judges are members of the community or first-year-out college students. At first, I tried the same abstract arguments and I lost in the same way. But eventually, I settled on 2 lessons about communication. I'd like to share them with you now. First, I learned to use language that people actually like. When discussing complicated subjects like our climate, it's easy, if you know it, to talk about how we're past the 400 parts per million of CO2 threshold, and that's going to create disastrous impacts, and that's technically true. And it sounds smart, but to that audience, it also sounded smug, distant, and cold. Maybe a whole lot of climate change advocates don't have a substance issue as much as a specificity issue. Because when I started changing from this abstract, big picture discussion to things that mattered to my audience, talking to farmers about drought, death of crops, talking to folks who were closer to the ocean about sea levels rising, they said it made sense. Even if they feel red with rage when they hear Green New Deal, if you change the description, you change the reaction. Why is it that so many people support the Affordable Care Act, but not Obamacare? Same thing, different response. The second thing I learned was a structure to help guide my audience. I call it the 3 Ps: the problem, the plan, and the proof. When we talk about the climate or anything else, we've got to agree on what the problem is. And a lot of technically knowledgeable climate experts will start with what matters to them before asking the audience what they care about. It might be that you care about that garbage patch that's floating in the middle of the ocean. Or it might be that you care more about learning that we have a spoon's worth of microplastics in our brains. It might be that you respond to the idea of emissions, or that you care more about the word pollution. But when you agree on the problem together, then you can move forward towards the plan. There's a whole lot of plans floating around, and a lot of them seem very helpful, but they're tough for people to grasp as soon as they hear it. You might have heard of someone named Frank Luntz, political strategist. Decades ago, he was tasked with seeing what people responded to concerning the climate. Back then, the term was global warming, and what he found is that people were concerned about global warming. They get it. It's a globe and it's getting hotter. What happens when you change that term to climate change? Turns out people actually care less. What's change? Change could be anything. Change is abstract. Change is amorphous. And here we are at a climate conference decades later using the term climate change that we learned gets fewer people to act. What are we going to do in reshaping language to shape the future? Once we understand the problem, we agree on the plan, you've got to give some proof. Some proof, sure, it's statistical, but a lot of other proof is visual and emotional. Why do I care so much about this? Because this extreme weather that we're experiencing here in California nearly killed my parents. It seems like forever ago, but in January of 2025, we remember the wildfires that rampaged across the state. I remember how the evacuation zone stopped just a block or two from my elderly parents' house. I remember their description of the sky choked out by smoke, of winds and flames, and a perfect nightmare. This matters to me for the sake of my parents, for the sake of my children. It matters to you too. What are you going to do to help people who don't see it yet start realizing how important this issue is? Now you might say, Iain, you're oversimplifying it. This is a complicated issue. Sure. But we live in a world now where people aren't thinking in paragraphs and theses. It's a world of likes and retweets and slogans and catchphrases and TikTok reels. And higher education, as much as I love it, might not be the fix. The percentage of Americans going to four-year colleges and universities is at a 20-year low. 1 in 5 of our fellow citizens is illiterate. And these feelings come attached to this. Feelings of shame, of resentment, of pride in real-world lived experiences. We need to reach out to people with language that makes sense to help guide them to a brighter tomorrow. Use language with an open hand, not a wagging finger. It's a sign of respect. So if we don't want to take all of our technical scientific knowledge and persuade people about the climate crisis, if we don't want to do that, we'll make the same mistakes I used to. We'll talk in jargon, we'll go over people's heads, and once again, we're going to fall back on sounding smart instead of making sense. At its core, communication and persuasion are about connection. So speak to people in language that they like, in an order that makes sense, and build bridges, not barriers. Try it out with that one person in your family. And if that person is you, go from being the one who always disagrees to the one who brings agreement.